y'all, welcome and welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Morgan and I am here for you to deliver all, that's weird wording. I am here to deliver all things spooky to you, whether that be through stories, through scary movies, through legends, through folklore. I'll do it all here, and if that sounds cool, I would love to have you. Now, for my other social medias and the email address and directions on sending your own stories into me to be read in a video just like this will be found in the description below, so please check that out. And without further ado, let's get into these stories. Turn on a light, grab a snack, because we're going to be here for a while and it's going to be nothing but terror. Let's get into it. For starters, I live with my parents and 2 of my 7 siblings. I live in Virginia, back in the mountains, and the nearest town is around 30 minutes away by car. My house is placed on my grandmother's land with about 50 acres. Here's my first story. This happened around 2 months ago, and it was around 11 o'clock at night. My sister told me to go out to her car and get something. She parks her car in the grass on the side of the house. So I get her key and go to the edge of the house where the light of the porch light ends and turn on my phone light. I take 1 step and stop. I started to feel like I needed a bigger light, so I turn around and go grab her big light. I've done this every time since I was really young and have to go outside at night. I scan around the half of my yard that I can see. It's relatively big and my double wide is in the middle of it. I hear something in the weeds on the other side of her big metal building. I try to shine the light over the top of it for a few seconds and then I hear a scream. It's loud and gut-wrenching. I scramble back inside and just repeat, fuck no, fuck no, fuck no. My mother was in the living room and starts saying, what? And I just repeated it. I never cuss anywhere near my mother because obviously respect thing, but I didn't care at that time and all of my hair was up. I was shaking. I didn't go back out to that door and I made sure the blanket I put over my window was covering every crack. Second story. When I was younger, me and my siblings would play in the woods near our house, and one time we were running through the woods and lost each other. I remember a whisper voice mumbling something I couldn't understand. It got louder and louder, and so I took off running to my house, and it sounded like something was chasing me. I get to our yard, and it stops. Third story. A few months ago, I was really into fitness, so I would go on long walks on the gravel road surrounding my house, and about half a mile away is one of the many graveyards around there that specifically is surrounded by woods on all sides. This graveyard is where my grandma, who passed away, was buried. The only clearing is the graveyard and the gravel road that goes by it, so I walked to the gravel with my dog, and I stood there for around 10 minutes. And I was talking to my grandma's grave about what had happened. I'd just gone through a traumatic event. I hear something in the woods all around me, and it sounded like it was circling me, but it couldn't have been the same creature because it had to be extremely fast to circle me that way. My dog gets on guard, and I was freaked out, so I called my sister to come get me. I started speed walking back until my sister met me on the road. Alright, next story. This is probably going to be a long one. This will be a collection of stories about growing up in my house, which was an old mercantile store on an island off the coast of Seattle. Here's a pic of that building and its associated dock for the boats from the 1900s. Here's another one from sometime in the 1990s from the water, from my Don't Sleep story. You can see the boathouse I talked about in the background. It's minty green. So yeah, this is a continuation off of another story. I think we'll be able to keep up, but if I need to fill anything, I will. My bedroom is at the back of the apartment down a hallway which has a large metal duct running on one side of it along the ceiling. The ceilings were also extremely low as our place was where the cows used to be, where the building was actively a store for sailors in the 1800s, so you could view the whole place as a bit claustrophobic. As a 5'6" person, I could stretch my arms up above my head and put my palms flat on the ceiling. At the start of the hallway was a room that became my mother's room. The next room, also to the left, was what had originally been my mom and dad's room prior to them separating, and it was the room closest to mine. I could always see the doorway, pretty much from anywhere inside of my space. I did not like this room at all. It gave me the creeps for reasons I couldn't put my finger on. It was the interior of the building, had no windows, and for this was always pitch black. It always gave me super uneasy feelings, and I imagine a lot of people can relate to this as it's kind of similar to not wanting to go into the basement as a kid or something along those lines. But anyways, on this instance, I was playing in my room. I had one of those little fake kitchen sets that most girls had back in the day, plastic and roughly kid-sized with a sink, fake oven, stove combo, and little pots and pans you could pretend to cook. Since I was the only kid and had no siblings that lived with us, I was by myself minding my business when I glanced towards my bedroom doorway, which was wide open. Standing there looking at me was a man. He was white and completely solid, so he wasn't misty or see-through. He wasn't super tall, and I only mention this fact because the entire apartment was short and he didn't reach the top of the door. I would guess he was maybe around 5'8" now in retrospect. He was wearing a red flannel shirt and the sleeves rolled up. He was also wearing a pair of faded blue jeans, a light colored t-shirt tucked in, a brown leather belt, a baseball cap facing the right way around with the bill out, and was white and red and had something embroidered on it. I couldn't read super well yet, being 4, so I'm not sure what it said. He had a brown handlebar mustache, and I think he had light colored eyes. He did not move. He was just standing in my doorway looking. If I had to guess, I'd say maybe he'd been in his mid-40s. From his clothes and mustache, I would say that it was around the 1970s, and it was the mid-late 1980s at this point. At first, none of this seemed totally odd. My dad frequently had people over, so I thought maybe it was one of his buddies. We moved into a place not too terribly long before, and he was still making friends, so it wasn't out of the realm of possibility, but it was no one that I recognized. I hadn't heard anyone walk down the tile floor hallway to my doorway, which tended to echo a lot, especially with the hollow metal duct that terminated in my room. How long had he been there? I blinked, and he was gone. After that point, I was actually aware that I wasn't alone in that house, even when I was alone. I don't think the man was the only entity there. Lights would turn on and off on their own, though it wasn't super common. I would hear footsteps in the hallway with no discernible origin. I would occasionally hear papers and things rustling in rooms that I didn't like. It became a storage room after my parents split up, which made zero sense. And I could hear my mother's voice specifically calling my name from other parts of this apartment. Sometimes she was there, sometimes she wasn't. I do also recall a few times where I was sitting on my bedroom floor playing with dolls with my back to the door facing the only window in the room. It was old glass and had a bit of a wave to it. I looked up from what I was doing to see a face stretched and distorted like a funhouse mirror in the reflection of that window, or like it was made of wax that had partially melted, so it drooped and bulged in places it shouldn't. It didn't appear to be the man that I had seen, as this face had no mustache that I could see, though it did seem male still. Its distorted mouth was moving, opening and closing, like it was wordlessly talking, standing directly behind me to the right. Only I wasn't in the reflection itself because I was seated far, far below the window. The first time I saw this, I went to get my father to show him, but by the time we returned to my room, the reflection was gone, and neither of us saw it. I even sat him down where I'd been, but there was nothing. The next time it happened, and every time after, my father had already moved out, and my mom wasn't the most believing sort. When I did try to tell her, she would just dismiss me, thinking I had an overactive imagination, so I learned pretty quickly to keep my mouth shut. All of this kind of pairs in comparison to waking up on the floor. A bit of context for this is I had a captain's bed. It was built into the wall and was basically like a bunk bed, but only had the top bunk and a half wall where the bottom bunk should have been. I had to climb a ladder to go to sleep, and if you sat up too quickly in bed, you would hit your head on the ceiling. It was at least a 4-foot drop to my non-carpeted bedroom floor, which was usually covered in toys. But I awoke, cold and confused on my floor, my covers and sheets still rumpled on my bed like I had just been in them and never left. They didn't look like I'd simply fallen out, drug off, or hanging off the edge of the bed, or even like I'd gotten up. I would think the covers would be thrown to a side. The ladder, which wasn't screwed or nailed onto the bed in any way, was exactly where it should have been, which I probably would have moved or even knocked over if I'd fallen. I still steadfastly refused to believe that I wouldn't wake up from a 4+ foot drop to a tile. I'd launched myself from that bed and got a goose egg on my head from trying to fly because my mom told me I could do anything I put my mind to, so you get the picture. The only thing my mind, even back then, could come up with was that I was there on the floor, but I had no way to prove it, and it did seem possible, though not probable, that I had fallen. A few relatively unrelated eventful months go by. The second time it happened, I felt more confident that I hadn't fallen, especially since I woke up to the middle of my room, in a fetal position, nowhere near my bed. At this point in my life, I had experienced quite a bit in the few years of living there. I was probably about 6 or 7 at this point, and a switch flipped in my brain for whatever reason. I wasn't scared, I was mad, fed up with all of it. With my parents not believing me with the weird crap that happened, to say I was over it was a vast understatement. "Stop," I yelled at the empty doorway, getting to my bare feet. "You can't do this to me anymore. Leave me alone." I grabbed a colored marker and literally stomped over to the doorway and drew a line on the tile floor, which was dark blue and got me into trouble later. "You can't come in here. See this line? Don't cross it." After that, the weird happenings, specifically in my room, stopped. I never woke up on the floor again after that point. Occasionally I could hear something pushing on my shut door from the other side. I could hear the wood creaking, but whatever it was, never tried the knob. I would still hear footsteps, weird, but previously outlined things would still happen, and did until I moved off the island to go to college. I think after a certain point in my life, they were so long-standing and reoccurring I just didn't care anymore. It held so much weight with me as a noisy neighbor might. It simply was, and still is, probably the building. More stories to come of this creepy island later down the road. And then they did send another email titled Bonus Round. So I just spoke with my mom, who was super dismissive of all of this when I was growing up, and she now agrees with me. That place is haunted. Remember when I said the place is still occupied, implying the apartment that I grew up in? I lied. Which is kind of cool. She believes me actually, and kind of not, because validation growing up would have been really nice. She said that when you lived there, you never really felt settled. And even went as far to say it isn't a place that you really felt comfortable in, like you could just hang out and relax. If given a choice, she liked being on the water, but did not like the general vibe of that place or the land around it. She said she tried to pass it off to herself as the underwater electrical cables. The electricity was making her and me paranoid, but the substation for that was farther down on the turnaround. For reference, in the first email, the one I'm responding to, is right next to this minty green boathouse where the power cables run to. Where I understand where she was coming from, as that would be logical, I personally feel that's too far from our apartment to be impacted by everything as we were. That still doesn't explain a vast majority of what went down over the years, and she agrees. This all came up because I sent her a pic from 1909, also from the first email, and started talking about the place. And for an extra fun horror movie bonus, our old apartment got gutted. One of the Mom's Island's friends sent her pics of the inside of the old apartment. I'm gonna share them. Pay attention to the quality of those photos as you look at them. Through all the walls in this photo, at the very back of the photo was the room that I hated. The first one is where the living room would have been. The yellow thing that you see on the top right of the pic is the metal duct I told you about in the story that terminated in my room at the back of the apartment. The archway that the duct tops leads into the kitchen. Quality looks crispy and nice. Directly in front, where the end of the hallway is tied, is where Mom and Dad's old room at the start of the hallway was. The far end of this light is actually tied to what would have been the wall that separated the bedroom and the living room, and there are 2 doors into that room, one of which is basically where the light is still hanging. My mom's friend only sent us 2 images of this part of the house, the living room area, but they were more or less the same picture taken in the same spot, but one was looking towards the ceiling, so I didn't bother including it. And this quality nightmare fuel below is what was once the kitchen, looking down the hallway, which started on the second yellow bump out of the left before the light starts to fade. The first closest to view, still on the left yellow thing, is the duct going through the archway into the kitchen mentioned in the first pic. The pic was taken approximately where a dining room table once was. The pic is actually slightly more unsettling to me because they got rid of the one lone window in the room, and the window in the office computer room that was on the other side of my bedroom through the wall, probably at the same time that they got rid of that side door. The yellow thing on the right, on the inside, is an alcove. It was a little walkway in the bathroom and housed the water heater that led to the side entrance door, which is no longer there. Now there are huge walls of window behind my mom's friend in all of these shots, so lots of natural light. That side of the building behind her was nothing but windows. One thing this pic kind of doesn't show as well is what supported between the 2 yellow chunks of duct were. There were shelves where our dishes went, and beyond that, the wall was left kind of recessed. I guess in the best way to put it. The pic makes the kitchen area look super small. Here's another shot still in the kitchen but slightly further in, basically at the start of where the hallway would have been. My room was basically the very back of these 2 images, though I'm not sure if you can even see my bedroom honestly. I'm not sure that desk looking thing is far back there, and I'm fairly certain my room would have been behind it. The vibe certainly didn't change, or maybe my experiences with it have trained my judgment. Equally interesting that the only normalish looking pic is the first one. The other 2 seem almost foggy or distorted, though not completely sure why. Maybe dust in one, it's hard to tell. I should also mention that these pics were taken November 24th, 2024, so 2 days prior to me sending you all of this. Why do I want to visit this building? I want to so bad. I want to visit it so bad. Why do I feel like it'll be my last paranormal investigation if I do? Alright, next story. I have a couple creepy stories that I can't really explain. One of them is my personal experience, and 2 of them are my mom's stories. This is the first story from my own personal experience. It was a few days before a holiday, Christmas if I remember correctly. Me and my mom always go to visit my grandparents for Christmas, and our flight was very early the next day, so we ended up going to sleep around 7 p.m. Now it's important to note here that my mom is not an early bird, and neither am I. I remember briefly waking up randomly and thinking it was still late at night since it was wintertime, so it was still pretty dark out in the early morning. I assumed I could get a couple more hours of sleep before I needed to wake up, so I started to go back to sleep. I was still half awake when I felt a finger tap my shoulder. Now this was one of the weirdest things I've ever experienced because it wasn't just my brain tricking me. I felt a firm double tap on my shoulder. It was as if someone was trying to get my attention. Still being half awake, I assumed it was my mom, and about 30 seconds later, I sat up in bed and realized my bedroom door was completely shut. I would have had to hear my mom open and close it if she had been in the room trying to wake me up. I got up to check what time it was and realized that we had to be leaving for the airport in 15 minutes. I also at this time realized that my mom hadn't even been awake. Me and my mom might have missed her flight if I didn't feel that weird tap on my shoulder. Kinda seems wholesome, but it was still pretty chilling. These next 2 are stories that are directly related since they both happened in the same apartment, and I believe it was the same entity. When I was in 2nd or 3rd grade, I lived in these really old apartments with my mom's small dog and cat. These apartments were fairly old, being built in the early 1900s to 1910s. On each floor in every building there are 2 apartments, and me and my mom lived on the 2nd floor. On the 1st floor there was an old staircase that led to a storage unit. Now I only went down there a few times in the 2 years that I lived in these apartments, but most times I would refuse to go down there because something about the energy coming from it just scared me. The whole building just gave me bad energy, but especially the basement. Sometimes at night I would hear noises coming from the hall outside, but none of that was ever that horrifying to me until my mom told me these stories. I would have been around 6 to 7 when this happened. I was having a sleepover with my best friend, we'll call him Jay. He came over a lot since our moms were best friends, but this was the first time he was sleeping over at this particular apartment because we had just moved there. We went to bed pretty early since we were still so young, but my mom explained to me that she woke up to a really loud crash late at night. Now, my dog and cat both slept with my mom every night, and the scariest thing about this is neither pet woke up from the noise, nor did me or Jay. He was a deep sleeper. So my mom, seeing that both pets were sound asleep at her side, assumed that me and Jay were messing around and broke something. She walked to the living room where Jay was sleeping, and he was in a deep sleep. She checked on me in my room, which was really just an extension of the living room with a curtain for privacy. I had a very loose and probably dangerous loft bed that would rattle loudly if you moved ever so slightly. She walked into the kitchen, and a bowl was broken on the floor in the very center of the kitchen, not anywhere near the edge of a counter. This bowl had originally been in the back of the drying rack next to the sink that was pushed all the way to the back of the counter. We had pretty good sized counters, by the way. This was the first encounter my mom had with our poltergeist. She believed it was its way of letting us know that it lived here too. The second story is on the shorter side, but this is just another encounter that my mom had with our poltergeist. This one I don't even think I was home for, but at the time my mom had a boyfriend come over to watch a football game with her. His phone flew off the nightstand at the side of the bed. I don't mean it fell off, it flew off and landed near the foot of the bed. He rarely came over after that. Oh, oof. Alright, next story. I've decided to share one of the most malicious stories that I've experienced. Well, that's a strong start. In the year of 2021, when I was around 16 and already extremely sensitive to the paranormal, I got an apprenticeship in a local horse barn in Switzerland. It was an old mill that was changed into a huge horse barn where children could take riding lessons. It had 3 huge barns with a capacity of around 30 horses and ponies, the barns reaching around the horse arena and the restaurant. It was quite a beautiful barn and nothing was out of the ordinary so far. To the right of the entrance to the barn was an old house where all the apprentices would live throughout their apprenticeship. It had a little apartment on the first floor with 2 bedrooms, a little kitchen, and a bathroom. The other 2 bedrooms were in the attic. I was alone in the attic that week and would stay from Monday to Friday, or should I say that this was the plan. When my mom and I, who drove me to the barn, entered the attic, it was eerie and dark. There was an old doll hanging from the ceiling, broken mirrors, and antiques scattered all over the place, and I immediately had a strange feeling in my gut and got goosebumps. The 2 dorms were separated by a self-made wall, the doors being old, heavy, and broken. You had to run against the doors to open them from the inside, and you couldn't open them normally. I wore a silver necklace my mom had gifted to me the day before she drove me to the barn. That information is going to be important. The dorm that I was staying in was very tiny, with a single bed across the door, a shelf to the left of the bed, and a huge pillar. To the left from the entrance, there was a huge old dresser covered in cobwebs. I got really creeped out by this room, but was too curious to not stay there. The roof was sloping, and on the left side there was around half a meter of wall where I noticed the shadow of a hand right behind my bed. I just ignored it for the time being and was proceeded to settle into my new room. The next night on Monday was pretty calm with a clear night sky. I heard crickets chirping outside and a soft breeze howling against the window, but I couldn't sleep well. The gut feeling would never go away. The next day, Tuesday, I felt extremely tired, drained, and just weird, as if something had sucked all of the energy out of me. The workday was very exhausting, but I survived. The following Tuesday night, I laid in bed watching YouTube on my phone with my headphones on as per usual. I couldn't sleep until midnight, and the closer the time got to midnight, the more I had a negative gut feeling telling me to get out of there. I ignored it. At midnight, I had an alarming feeling. As everything went silent, my phone suddenly shut off. I put my headphones away and looked at the door in terror as I couldn't move at all anymore. The door handle suddenly smacked down. The door slammed open. Note there was no wind or anything that could have caused it, and the door was broken as mentioned, and it proceeded to close and open repeatedly for 10 minutes. After 10 minutes, I screamed, "Are you done yet?" as the door smashed closed and everything went back to normal again, but my gut feeling got even worse. I slowly turned my head to the left where the shadow of a hand was at the wall to see that now there was a shadow of a face next to the hand. I then got creeped out and immediately couldn't sleep. The next day, Wednesday, when I stood up, I felt horrible. I couldn't walk properly, and it felt like I was walking on knives that would stab my feet with every step. After about lunchtime, I couldn't bear it anymore, and my mother picked me up. When I pulled my shoes off, my feet were twice their size as they were before, completely swollen and bruised as if someone had broken my feet. It's not done there. Remember the necklace I mentioned? After I got home again, our house started to get haunted. Every night, knocks could be heard from my bedroom door the whole night. Things fell off shelves, mirrors shattered when I looked inside, and paintings fell off the walls. After a few weeks, I realized it may be the necklace. Me and my mom cleansed our house and burned the silver necklace in our backyard. When we did, we could hear the shattering and terrifying screams. After that, we never had any incidents with the demon or spirit again. Where'd she get the necklace? Where did she get the necklace? Demons are us? Oh my god. Alright, next story. I've claimed to be able to hear and see ghosts for as long as I can remember. I only say claim because it's been a while, but I truly do believe in my abilities. Because of this ability, I've had a new run-in with spirits, usually calm or nice interactions. a ghost flickering his personal candle to distract me when I fought with friends, a sweet little girl running past me in hallways, or a tall man standing behind me just out of view. But there's 2 instances that were not positive in any way, shape, or form. The first one was me and a friend were using a spirit app to talk to spirits around our lake. We'd already heard of a girl when I was in the cabin and one near a well, so we walked around the whole lake to find more. While we were stopped at one of the many beaches, I was teaching my dog to swim because she feared water. A few minutes later, a concerning name popped up, Levi, which at first we were like, hey, that's a cute name, until I realized it could be short for Leviathan, one of the princes of hell. Shortly after that realization, it started saying things like, die, dog, puppy, and swim, and because the dog was terrified of water, we took that as a threat towards her. We got out of that lake real fast. The second time, I was trying to sleep with my door open because my cat couldn't decide where she wanted to be. Well, late into the night, probably a bit past midnight, I heard movement outside of my door and rolled over to see what looked like my mom standing in front of that door. Important context, my room is dead at the end of the hall. My mom would have to backtrack from hers to get to me. This mom was dark and shadowy with red eyes, and I felt unsafe. A few seconds passed and she moved to go to the washroom to the other end of the hall before returning to her room without acknowledging me. I asked my mom in the morning and she said that she had never left her room that night and reminded me that she in fact had a bathroom in her room. She had no reason to leave and use the main bathroom. The next night I slept with the door closed and saw a mass in front of the door. It was roughly the size of a small bear. I felt safe that night and slept soundly. P.S. A wholesome ghost story. When I was 8 or 9, I made friends with a girl who was really sweet to me. As we got older, she changed and became manipulative in a way. When I came out as trans, she refused to call me by my new name and insisted my dead name was my real name. When I made friends with a new student, she started demanding that I could only be friends with her or the new girl and insisted that I drop the new girl. All around a mean person. The year she moved away, I was messaging her, trying to get her to call me by my name and understand my boundaries. I was getting quite upset and crying, and then I noticed the flame of my Harry Potter candle suddenly spike in height. I was distracted by it enough to ignore the girl, a male who was there to help me. Later, me and my cousin discovered he was around 60 and named Garrett. He's been with me since. Side note, bad friend, let that one go. No. Calling you by your preferred name is the bare minimum, and if someone cannot do that, bye. So with the Leviathan story, I want to throw this out there, and my husband actually mentioned the second part to me just now. So the first part is things can use names of different entities to scare you. That doesn't mean the thing that they're naming is bad, but they could be using it as a tactic. My husband threw in, because he's sitting here listening to these stories, that it could have been Leviathan reaching out, but maybe it was a warning that, hey, if you don't get your dog out of there, it's going to get hurt. So get it out of the water. Just, throwing in a new perspective. All right, let's read one more story. I love your videos and thought I'd tell you of my weird experiences. For context, at the time I was 15, living in a small country town in Australia with my mother and stepfather. Our living room had 2 walls with floor-to-ceiling windows, and from our living room we could see the tree line. I was home alone at this time at around 9 p.m. and it was completely dark. I was talking to a friend on my computer when I heard scratching at the window behind me. I looked around but didn't see anything outside. I got a strong uneasy feeling though. I told my friend to be quiet and we sat in silence for a few moments, and before I was about to assume that I had just imagined it, I heard a grotesque sound somewhere between a growl and a whine. This sound does not match any animal that I have ever heard, and I've spent countless hours listening to animal noises trying to make sense of it. I was terrified but continued staring straight ahead at my computer, still silent, not daring to move or make a noise. Around 15 minutes later, my parents arrived home and I told them what I heard. My mother didn't believe me at first and made jokes about it. Whenever she would mention it to someone or ask me to explain the sound, I felt deeply uneasy and it brought tears to my eyes for no explainable reason. Well, maybe 4 months later, I was at my computer yet again and I thought I saw something moving outside on the grass a few feet away. I assume it's my dog. I heard those same noises again, but it was a little further away. My dog started scratching at the front door to be let in and looked terrified. This time my mother heard it too, but still wasn't sure about it. I got the same dreadful feeling and ignored it. 3 months later, I was in bed and I hear movement outside of my window. I roll over so I'm not facing the window and get an overbearing sense that I'm being watched, and all I want to do is look out the window. Before I get to, I hear the same noise just below my window on the ground, and then the next night I hear scratching and tapping on my window for maybe an hour straight. Until recently, I hadn't heard it again, but it's safe to say my mother and I refuse to go outside to feed our animals alone, especially at night. One night recently, we had gotten home late and needed to put our chickens and ducks away for shelter. I was locking away the ducks near the top of our 1 acre when the chickens in the coop near the bottom of our padlock start freaking out. I tried to see what was upsetting them and saw a dark figure, maybe around 9 feet tall. It looked like a man stuck in the fence near their coop. My mother and I quickly went back inside without making much of a fuss, and the next morning I found cream-colored fur on the fence where I had seen it. None of our animals have that color fur. Ever since, I've been occasionally hearing voices call out to me and seeing tall man-like figures. I cleansed myself and my mother and my whole house with sage and at east, but I'm worried about it coming back. My family's always had a history with this sort of thing despite being Christian. Alright, well that is all for this video. It's pretty long. I know I have to edit, but it's reading 34 minutes right now.
Sorry, Sorry.
Take your business elsewhere. But that is all for today. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me, and I will see you next time.